you're obviously from Jordan, but you've lived in the States for a long time. I'm really curious about what you also wrote the screenplay for this. What brought you to this idea, this story, and also why you chose to produce it in Jordan as well?
I mean, what made me? I thought I would make movies in the U.S. I didn't think I would ever go back to Jordan and make Jordanian movies because there was no such thing that I knew of as Jordanian cinema. And then my producer David Pritchard, who I met in LA, said I had just gotten accepted at the American Film Institute to study because I had a business background before all that. And then one day he said, why don't you make a movie in your country? Like, you know, this is a place where you have an opportunity to make a film. And that was in 2005. And so he planted the seed, and the first thing, our editor, Laith Munjali, and I, we went to just the Cheesecake Factory in Beverly Hills, of all places. And we started thinking like, what could we like come up with something like unique? And my grandfather had passed away that year in January, and I always felt like an affinity to him. He was 93 years old. He still had this very like innocent look at the world, very wide open eyes. And I thought this would be this. I think that I want to make a movie about a humble man, you know, who has all this mystery behind like what's his past. And my grandfather had traveled the world, and he'd been a doctor, and he'd been, you know, just educated in Switzerland, but he always was a simple kind of person who walked downtown and all the kids knew him. And you know, so a lot of Abu Raed is inspired by my grandfather, who I dedicated the film to. And originally the script was, so I wrote the first draft, and I wrote 30 drafts over the span of my time at AFI, searching for conflicts, because the original script had no conflict. It was just about pilots. Oh, my father's a pilot, so I grew up around airports, and I also thought aviation is something else I'm familiar with. So so I thought, oh, make a movie about like social class differences in Amman and Jordan, all these things. And then just slowly, over draft after draft, I started to look into conflict, because it was just too happy. The script was too, captain and and the janitor and all these things. So I started to think, let me look for a real social problem that you can find anywhere around the world. And I started to research, and I found that child abuse was actually something that was starting to get talked about more and more in Jordan. And I went to a center that had been, bringing in kids, and I learned that parents were not reprimanded. They would just, if there were people who came forward, they would take the kids, but they would not reprimand the father, which is, ended up kind of being something I hinted at in the film. And then anyways, so long story short, I did all these drafts, and then one day I called Nadim and I said, well, actually, that's another story. We'll tell that story.
Well, that was my follow-on question, was how the relationship between you two developed, because it seems almost like this role was written for you, Nadim, and I was curious, how that relationship developed and how you took on this character. I mean, one that is now obviously so personal to you as well, being inspired by your own family.
Well, it's a very strange story. I was traveling to Jordan with a film crew to shoot a couple of scenes in the Son of the Pink Panther.
This is in 1993.
1993. And the pilot called me into the cockpit and he said, you're an actor, my son is very interested in filmmaking. Could he come one day and watch you while you're shooting? I said, yeah, no problem. This 15-year-old, 16-year-old, very polite kid turns up, And yes, welcome. I talked to the crew. They said, yes, he can sit there. He watched the shooting all day, and then we said goodbye, and I really thought, what a nice kid. He really is so pleasant. Goodbye.
But you came and gave me a very warm hug.
I gave you a hug.
Yeah, I never forgot that.
Yeah.
He was very warm. You introduced me to Blake Edwards and Roberto Benigni and everyone.
That's right. That's right. So anyway, he went away 16 years later. He's 31 by now. I'm 120. So, sitting peacefully in Upper Road having my dinner, this fella rings. He says, I've written a film script, and I think that you are the right man to play the Captain Abu Raed. And he sent me the script. I read it, and I thought, blimey, you know, I left Jordan 50 years ago to look for the spiritual man, you know, to look for Abu Raed. I looked for him everywhere, Moscow, London, New York. Eventually I was called to Amman to find him in Jordan after 50 years. And the amusing thing is that he employed about 100 Jordanians on the film. And the amusing thing that they all kept coming to me and saying, Granddad says hello. Because, you know, I left Jordan when there was nothing really. And then suddenly these kids are, you know, making films. But I knew their grandfathers. Anyway, yes, that's the story of the relationship, and I'm, you know, I will be eternally grateful for giving me the chance to play Captain Abu Raed, because I think we need in the East, particularly, strangely enough, in the East, not in the West. The West is far more spiritual nowadays than the East. But in the East, we need some kind of a return to human values. And I think Captain Abu Raed has got that beautiful quality about it.
I think that's an interesting question, because the film's obviously won many international awards, I believe 28, and it's won a lot of audience awards as well outside of the region itself. And I'm curious about, especially because the film has beautiful moments, but also these darker moments, as you said in the beginning. And I was wondering how audience reactions have been in a different context, and if there's anything for either of you that you've been taken by in terms of the feedback that you've received at all. It's been, I believe, almost 5 years now since it was released.
Well, I mean, what's so amazing was that I've traveled a lot with the film, and so have you, Nadim. It's amazing to see a very universal response. Pretty much in most countries, people laugh in the same places, and they, you know, when he opens the door and you see the kids, and there, it's behavioral humor, you know. So that's kind of the moment where I know, okay, they're interested in the movie, because you hear the audience laughing, and Noor, you know, showing up, and you know the marriage, the suitor is constantly harassing her, or her dad bringing in all these goofballs to marry her. So the humor has worked internationally, and likewise the themes are universal. Because from the beginning, I didn't want to make a Jordanian local movie. I wanted to make a movie that is universal. Thus the orchestral score, thus the eye contact. In fact, when we were rehearsing, I found that we were taking away dialogue more and more, and just letting those moments simmer in the looks and the interchange of eye contact, and you know, the behavior was. So it could be a silent film almost in some places, you know. And so the response has been very, very similar wherever we went.
Yes, well, that was great working with you, because you had confidence in the actor. You know, we foreign actors who grew up in Europe, they're so mistrusted that a lot of words are forced down their throats to justify their presence in front of the camera. And it was so refreshing to work with you, because you said that, you know, there's no need for that. Like, cut it out.
I enjoy slashing my screenplays. I
And
really enjoy it. It gets better as you take away. The more
and
you
the
take out,
actor's sort of blind response to these situations is to say, "Oh, I'm losing my part. I'm losing my line." You know? That's okay. This is wonderful. We could cut the whole lot.
merciless.
Yeah, that was lovely actually. That really was that trust.
Yeah.
You know, without being a nationalist, but because I think we understood each other, we come from the same village, we suddenly became very comfortable and trusting to work together.
Yeah, and in fact, trust. Speaking of trust, like that's the beautiful thing about Nadim, is that, because of course Abu Raed is a serious character, but Nadim, and if anyone who knows Nadim, he's cracking jokes all the time and telling stories. So everyone on the set was like felt very comfortable because nobody else was a trained actor other than Abu Raed, who's actually a very nice man. He really is. He's a theater actor. But everyone would just like gravitate around Nadim and feel very comfortable doing this because they hadn't acted before, and it just became a very comfortable environment.
Yes, well, I mean, I say to everybody, it was the happiest film I've ever done. And I think I've done about 600 all over the world, But really it was, I don't know, it had a magical quality, but then that's very private probably between us, 100 people in the film. It had a truly magical quality about it. And it's full of adventure, full of fun. It was wonderful. And it was great after, spending 50 years in the West. It was wonderful to return and see the enormous change that's happened in the country.
Do you think this is partly because you come from similar narratives or backgrounds? You were both living in the West, producing work, but then it was seeing you go back to these roots, as it were, in this way must have been absolutely an astounding emotional connection formed through that.
It helps to have the same background. It helps because probably a local director who says, I don't know what dirty tricks this actor's learned in the West, and if he's going to bring them in with him, So he knew knew the style, and therefore there was trust. Indeed, and some actors, I don't think they go on with. Who are used to sort of television acting to justify their existence. They have to have, to show it. And these people found it difficult working with them. Who were demanding, a measure of truth in the performance.
You studied business first, and then you transitioned into cinema, and this was your first feature film, and then now you've gone on to make 2 more features, I believe. I'm curious how, if we were going to classify you under the rubric of other Jordanian filmmakers, pretty amazing, first feature Jordanian film in 50 years, and then go on to make a Disney film. But what's that been like, that experience, and for you personally?
Well, it's every movie has its own miracles and adventures. The Disney film we got to make last year. We filmed a movie called The United, which is the first Arabic language Disney movie, and we cast. It's about a soccer team that's from all over the Middle East, and they come together under a has-been coach who unites them, and he's conned into coming in to train them. So it's a formulaic film. Like the Mighty Ducks and Remember the Titans and those type of Disney sports movies. But what was special about that one is that we got to actually do something very unique to the Middle East. If you look at it that way, it's a metaphor about positive thinking and forward thinking and positive role models and overcoming our differences and the stereotypes of the different Middle Eastern characters. And it ended up being it was a very tough shoot because it was during the revolution in Egypt. We cast an Egyptian star who had to go back and forth every week to visit his family, and then Disney was concerned about the safety of the situation, and then we also had weather issues, and somehow we overcame all those, and we finished the movie. It comes out at the end of this year in the Middle East. And then I made another film in LA. I wanted to make an American film so that I'm not perceived as an Arab filmmaker, So I adapted a Dostoevsky film, novella called White Nights, that is a very Chaplin-esque take on Dostoevsky. And so each film brings its own miracles and joys and hardships, How are they different? It's hard to compare. Abu Raed will always be like my special baby. This is the movie that I rewrote this 30 times. So every time I would write, I would just find new jewels in it, and I don't know. I've seen this movie with an audience. This is my 73rd time. Although I haven't seen it in 2 years, so it's very nostalgic watching this. And but I've seen it with audiences so many times. I don't think I can do this with any other movie.
I think that's my final question before I open up to you is who do you make your films for and who is your audience? I think because a lot of the conversation as part of this festival has been about popular Arab cinema and thinking about who the audience is for these films. And I think one of the things that I'm guessing it's a statement and a question. I think that you make your films for a very specific, for a broad audience, and you use the word universal a lot. And I wondered if you agreed with that, and what you think perhaps about other filmmakers working in that context, because there are very often, one thing that we've discussed this week in our forums, etc., is that regionally many filmmakers have been using sort of the umbrella of the auteur to make films that merely stay in the festival circuit and never kind of transcend that. And I was curious how you felt about that.
Well, I mean, for me, when I'm making the film, I'm always thinking of the audience. You know, when we're shooting, I'm thinking, when you're directing, in fact, you're watching, you're looking for a moment of truth on behalf of the audience. I always think of directing as you're an ambassador for the audience. But at the same time, I don't think I would ever make, or I hope I will never make a movie that is just for an audience, because I have to always relate to the themes and find the challenges for the characters in there. In this movie, there's all these themes of forgiveness, sacrifice. You know, they're universal. With the United, it's, you know, it's overcoming adversity and your challenges. Yeah, you have to make I mean, in my opinion, I want to make movies for audiences because I want people to come see the films. I don't want to make movies just for my own selfish desires to be an auteur or any of that stuff. But at the same time, I do believe that, well, we'll see. There should be a pattern between the films. You'll see similarities, I think, from each film, where somehow your composition or your, you know, way of the pacing or way of telling the stories evolves. So I hope that there will always be a personal touch in all the films. And it's interesting because there's some similarities. I think United picks up from Captain Abu Raed and it goes in a new direction. And then Strangely in Love, which is the Dostoevsky adaptation based on White Knights, is my friends and the composer, Austin, was saying the character, the main character, who's like 35 years old, 36 years old, is like a young Abu Raed, because he's like a simple guy, you know, he's like a very naive character and all these things. So there are these commonalities. He's got a big beard, you know. So there are these commonalities that somehow seep into the film.
They say we write the same story, all our
Yeah.
Really, we make the same film, we make the same novel. They say that, but we approach it from a different angle. But it is the same image in our head.
Yeah.
Let me tell you something about the audience. And, when Abu Raed came 5 years ago, I have a young man who is my friend in Jordan. You know, he's what I call a typical Jordanian. So I kept saying to him, Mahmoud, have you seen Abu Raed? No, Allah, I said, you know, we haven't seen him. Okay, 5 years later, this time, because I'm going to Jordan tomorrow, I rang him 2 days ago to tell him, you know, that I'm coming. He said, Abu Raed, the family is waiting to see you. 5 years later, he managed to take notice of the film. So I don't know who you're talking about.
We have time for just one or two questions back to back, and we'll answer them one. We'll take them both, and then we'll answer.
Can I just first of all say thank you very much to you both. It was a brilliant film. I'm very glad I had the pleasure to see it this evening. What I want to know is, what sort of impact do you think it's made in your country, and do you think it will perhaps revitalise the Jordan film industry? I hope so. I'd like to see more films come out of Jordan. What sort of impact is it, do you think?
Well, there were, I mean, when it came out, people were very proud. It won Sundance, and it won, you know, so many festivals around the world. So people were very proud of that, and since then, this was 2007, since then, and I wouldn't say because of Captain Abu Raed, but it certainly felt like it set an example that we can make feature films and be, you know, international. There have been how many films? A bunch of...
There have been 4 or 5.
4 or 5 feature films made in Jordan. There's a film school that has, not because of this, but there's a film school. I mean, there's been a movement. The Royal Film Commission started in 2003. There's been a film school that's generated these filmmakers, the Red Sea Institute for Cinematic Arts. And so there's, there has been a movement. And in fact, you know, The Hurt Locker, which won the Oscar a couple of years ago, Catherine Bigelow came to the set of this movie when the escape scene. She sat next to me when we were filming because they were considering shooting in Jordan, and they saw that there was this whole shoot, and that this and other reasons they were going to shoot in Morocco and they were going to shoot in other places. Finally, they decided to shoot in Jordan because they saw that this is the real deal. We were so in that regard, it's
Yeah, I
been
think
good.
so. I think so. I think a lot of people are being too modest. I think a lot of people, a lot of young people, people who work with us as assistants, are making feature films now. Because I think they look and they say, yeah, this is a bunch of Jordanians. They've made a film, Well, why can't we? So this is very, very true, and I think it will go on growing. And Jordan was empty, was very jealous of Morocco, which is the center of international filmmaking. But now Jordan is doing very, very well, and I think thanks to such efforts, absolutely.
They said that he's not so smart. If he can do it, we can do
Yeah.
it.
He looks dumb, I can't do it.
We'll take this last question here that you have.
Okay, my name is Hanan. I'd like to thank you very much for this film. I've been studying the past 3 years politics, and in most of my classes we're taught that, if you're facing a problem, you fix it by raising taxes, by raising the food prices, and so forth. And when I watched this film, it touched my heart because it made me see how the policies of the politicians, they really affect the people at home. It showed us, for example, Abu Raed. I really liked his character because you didn't really show him as a villain. You showed us also the human side of him. I mean, that part where his son was looking directly at him and seeing him trying so hard to sell just to feed his family, and it wasn't working. So the policies that we do as politicians ultimately have an effect on every home and every individual, and it's just that human thing. It really touched my heart, and thank you so much. Even that part where the taxi driver goes on about, the petrol is rising and I have to work for 13 hours, and my question, I talk too much, I'm really sorry. My question is basically, you showed us the human side of everyone, and personally I didn't see a villain, but why did you choose to end it like this with Abu Raed? I mean, did you feel that sometimes one has to give up on a challenge, or?
Well, for me, the whole movie is modeled after as universal as it gets, the hero's journey, which is it's the same themes as Braveheart and all those epics. He goes through sacrifice. He has to face this man at the end, and then it's transcendence. It's not that he dies and he's reborn as Murad. He has to pass the torch. Murad wears the hat at the end, so Murad becomes the Abu Raed. So and it's really about how people connecting across generations, across social spheres, and so for me, that's the broad universal aspect of it. Obviously, I'm not going to make a movie that's saying, here's the solution to the problem. I'm just telling a fable. And so it's a timeless fable, but it doesn't propose the solutions. It just says, this is one man's sacrifice.
I want to tell you, I fell in love with you because when I went to Jordan when I was very young, and then I saw Abu Raed, you represented everything beautiful about the Arab world. So please, I think you mentioned something about that it's only in the East that we need to look for the human values. But actually your character was beautiful because you represented everything beautiful about the Arab values.
Yeah,
So much.
how it should be. But I kept saying in Jordan, Abu Raed is in this world, but not from this world. Excuse me. They leave. What are you talking about? So it's a conception which came from the East, adopted in the West. And we forgot we are so horribly materialistic now. It's quite
You're
frightening.
sitting right here now, so we have you.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Abu Raed, and thank you so much, Amin and Nadim. You made great effort to be here today. We really appreciate it. I think you guys will be around mulling about here for a little bit if you guys have questions you haven't been able to ask. But thank you so much for sharing your film and being with us. Thank you.